Today's topic is don't let your circumstances define who you are. I was a caregiver. Now I'm a widow. I've had anxiety, depression, PTSD. Those are all results of the life that I have lived, but that's not an excuse to just let everything go, to just give up on life. Bad things happen to people all the time. It is up to us, it is up to you yourself to make the decision to move forward and to live life to its fullest despite the obstacles. That doesn't mean ignoring what has happened or how it's affected you. It means doing the work to heal so that you can move forward. It isn't easy. In fact, I can say it's very difficult, but it is necessary.
What a cool topic today. I'm excited to discuss these ideas about, I think, what ultimately come down to choices. Circumstances are what happens to us. How we respond to those are our choices. And so I think it's really important to kind of identify where we can pick up those, kind of the pieces that are left over from whatever circumstance we've been given or whatever has happened to us, and move forward in a way that's positive and hopefully experience some growth in that. So I think it's a really useful thing that will apply to a lot of different people, because like you said, bad things happen. It's just part of this life.
Yes, unfortunately, it is. And I do want to emphasize the fact that this is not an easy thing to do. I've had a lot of people ask me questions about how I've done this, and it's not any one thing that I can point to. It is a choice that I make every single day, and it's choices that I make in the things that I do in my life. So it's not an easy thing, but you have to start somewhere. So yeah, I just wanted to recognize that this is not something that you can just make a decision that this is how it's going to be and it's going to be easy. It definitely takes work.
I think that's I like that. I like that you've made that kind of distinction, because it is easy. I think we had talked about one time kind of wearing your circumstances like a coat, like a warm fuzzy coat, and you can kind of get lost in that, and then you never grow outside of that thing, whatever that is. And maybe it's a diagnosis, maybe it's something, that a traumatic event that's happened to you, something like that. You can easily just lose yourself inside that one thing, and you never grow and develop. And so what you're talking about, I think, is so important, making the choice to step outside of that and let that be a part of who you are rather than your entire identity. And we talked about, you and I talked about, kind of carrying the term caregiver with you over a number of years, and that included a lot of different capacities, right? That you were a caregiver that looked different from year to year, but it was the same term that was used through all those years. And then now you're going to carry, really until, the foreseeable future, the term widow with you the rest of your life. So thinking about those two terms, it made me wonder, like, what your relationship is with those terms. And you talk about being a caregiver versus being a widow. Are you more comfortable with one than the other, or how do you reconcile those with your life now?
I will tell you that I'm not fond of either term. If I had to say that I'm more comfortable with one over the other, I would say caregiver, but really I don't like either one of them, because I think that they are just, it's a term that defines you as one thing. And as a caregiver, I was not just a caregiver, but I saw people define me as that. So it wasn't just me defining myself, it was other people defining me as a caregiver. And I was so much more than a caregiver. I gave up my entire life to take care of Lance. I poured everything into caring for him. I think the term caregiver is, I feel like it's insulting because, I mean, really, when you think of a caregiver, tell me what your thought is as if if somebody were to tell you that person is a caregiver, what is your first thought about that person and their role in life?
I think it's the image that's conjured up in my head is something like a nurse, right? It's someone who provides a somewhat sterile service to someone who's not capable of providing that service for themselves. And so it doesn't carry, because I was thinking about the relationship between the term caregiver and something like mother, because those two are essentially the same thing. And yet one carries a warmth with it that the other one doesn't. The caregiver label has a sterile nature to it that doesn't really talk about all the things that are involved in being a caregiver. There's so much more kind of emotional impact.
Right. A caregiver, to me, a caregiver is a nurturer. And that's not a picture that you would get from that term. But beyond that, I mean, I did everything. I took over Lance's entire life. I researched his disease symptoms constantly. So I was a researcher. I was a nurse. I was his chauffeur. I was his wife. I mean, there are so many hats that I wore while I was a caregiver. So just saying caregiver is too, I don't know if it's too broad or if it's too narrow of a term to use.
It's both at the same time because it's so singular, but it can also mean so many other things. It's not as easily definable. And yet it conjures such a specific image, at least for me, and I would imagine for most people. I mean, that is what I thought of immediately when I first met you. And you said caregiver. The image I have is, like I said, just very sterile, very matter of fact and to the point. You take care of all the necessary arrangements of someone's probably medical or just I wouldn't think about being a chauffeur. I wouldn't think about preparing meals. I wouldn't think about providing emotional support or being an advocate for them or researching diseases, those kinds of things. I wouldn't think about all that. I think about making sure they take their medication on time and are doing whatever kinds of therapies would be necessary to manage their illness or disease. So it's like too singular and too broad all at the same time, if that's possible.
Right. Because I was his caregiver, but also the people that I hired to come into the house were his caregivers. So we all had the same term, but we all had different roles in his life.
And I wouldn't say that everyone who carries the term caregiver acts with the same degree of care and compassion and love and kindness, sometimes necessarily, and sometimes just through choice or whatever struggles the individual is going through. To lump all those people together under one term, that could be hard, I think. And I can only equate it. I've never been specifically a caregiver, but I was am a mother. I still am. And I think about that. Like there's moms that are not good moms, and there's moms that are great moms. And there's moms that spend more time or less time with their kids or become more involved or less involved. And so to just say you're a mom, that just means that you produced a child singularly and then broadly. That's all those things. It's a therapist and a chef and a chauffeur and a, educator and all those things. So it's, yeah, too singular and too broad.
But then you asked me also about the term widow. And Being called a widow has a finality to it that I don't like. Yes, I realize that Lance is gone, but the finality I'm talking about is the end of the conversation. And you and I have talked about this, Jenna, where saying I'm a widow has a period at the end of it. If I say I lost my husband or my husband passed away, that leaves an opening to ask a question or to express something on the other side. And it allows me to talk about him in a way that I'm a widow does not. I'm a widow defines me as this is the end of me. And it can't be the end of that life because I am who I am because of the life that I had with him. So I don't like saying I'm a widow because then that means I have moved beyond that, which means I've left all of that behind and I will never do that. So I will leave it as I lost my husband.
I like that a lot. And it really does kind of go back to that initial point that we made about not allowing that to be the defining piece of your life. It's just a piece of you. That's all it is. It isn't all of you. And yet, as you said, those experiences help shape who you are today. So it's so intricately woven into the fabric of who you are now, but it's not the only thing about you. There are plenty of other facets to your personality and who you are as a human being. And I think it's the same thing with the caregiver term. It's there's more to me than this, and yet it has shaped who you are. You'd be doing yourself a disservice and selling yourself short to just hide out in that term and allow it to be the only thing about you, either one, caregiver um, or widow. And again, just to tie in from my perspective, I've found that I've had plenty of acquaintances over the years, women I've met too, and this is, I think, a really common thing. They go through a divorce and they don't know who to be because they were so and so's wife, or their children grow up and move out and they don't know who they are because they were so and so's mother. And outside of those things, they don't know who they are because that's what defined them. And so I think it's a natural tendency that people do. They do it with their jobs. They do it with, um, gosh, I've seen people do it with just where they live, right? They live in a certain place and that's who they are. And they define everything with that one piece of them. So I think it's a real danger, but I think it's probably even more so with something that has such a deep psychological impact, like caregiving or the loss of a loved one or a spouse in your situation. Um, did you find things that helped you to maintain your own individuality as you were going through all those years of caring for Lance in varying degrees? How did you stay Ruth Ann as opposed to just becoming Lance's wife?
This is an area where I did not excel. I had a hard time maintaining my identity. And looking back, I really believe the reason for that is it was such a slow progression of his disease, of his illness, that I just gave up little pieces of myself at a time. And I didn't realize how much of myself I had given up until it was too late. I couldn't go back. And I needed to be who I was at that time. So there were a couple of things that, as I did look back recently, photography, getting out, and that's something that's always interested me. I got my first camera when I was 10 years old, and there's just something about being out in nature, especially, and taking photographs. And I have had several friends throughout my life who have also enjoyed photography. And so whenever I had the opportunity to get out with someone who also enjoyed photography, going out and taking pictures, that was something that I loved doing. But I always had my phone or my camera with me, and I was always taking pictures anyway. So that's one thing. And the other thing is writing. I've always been a writer, probably started that about the same time that I started taking photographs. And so those are two things that I just kind of always kept all the years through that kind of grounded me in this is me. But that's kind of all that was left of me at the end.
I do remember when I came out to see you a while back, and I was going through your house and I saw you had some sticky notes up in different places around your house with little reminders. And I was so excited because I said, "Oh my gosh, that was you." Because when I initially met you and you were caregiving, you had lots of notes up everywhere for Lance because of his memory loss. And I thought, why does she have sticky notes up? And then it occurred to me that was just her.
Well, at the time, I mean, I did it for Lance because it was something that worked for him. But all of these, yeah, that's definitely something that is me. I have little sticky notes up all over my house still, and I have little reminders of positive um positive affirmations or just things that I need to remember about what's going on in my life right now. And I'll take a sticky note. I have a whole wall of them, and I'll find one that really pertains to my life right now, and I'll pull it off that wall and I'll go stick it somewhere else because then I see it. If they're always in the same place, I don't see them. So that's funny that you mentioned that.
Well,
I
it's such a cool practice. Like it really is a cool practice.
Well, I gave it up for a while because I thought this is something that reminded me so much of my life caring for Lance because with his memory loss and his dementia, it was something that we had to do. And so I thought I'll just give it up and we'll leave that in the past as that was something that was Lance's, but I discovered that it was really mine.
Well, it was charming when I saw it and realized that. And I think I mentioned it to you and said, "Oh my gosh, that's you. You are a note putter upper."
Yeah, all those things that I did to keep everything organized and everything in its place. Lance also he thrived on that type of environment that was well ordered, well structured, but that's who I've always been. So for me to do something like that, it was easy for me to just get it all set up that way that because that is who I am.
Well, I think it's been fun to kind of see because I did meet you toward the end of your caregiving years. Um, I do remember wondering to some extent who you were. I could, clearly see your personality, but I remember wondering to myself how much of that is caregiver RuthAnn and how much of that is wife RuthAnn and how much of that is RuthAnn and where all those balances kind of lied in your within you. And so to see you sort of emerge has been it's been so fun. And it's like having an old friend, but also seeing new pieces of an old friend. So it's just kind of this growth that's like you returning to who you were before and also developing new pieces of yourself. But I think you're such a good example of not just settling into that circumstance, wearing that coat and saying, "This is who I am." You're so much more than that.
Well, it's been really fun for me to watch this progress too, because I had forgotten who I was. Like I said, thinking about this, the photography and the writing were the two things that really stand out. And I had even forgotten about the post-it notes until you mentioned that. But um, I'm having to stop and think all the time. Is this something that I really enjoy doing? Is this me, or was this something that I did out of necessity? And but a lot of times that necessity was for me.
It would have been you all along, maybe regardless of the circumstances or situations, because it's just who you are.
As we were talking about this topic, I really sat and I thought about losing myself while I was caregiving. And it was something that really bothered me for a long time. And so I thought, if I were to go back and give my old self some advice, my young self some advice, what would it be so that I wouldn't lose myself? And I was really interested to find that what I came up with was this. When you first get married, start your journal and write down all the things that you can about yourself, your hopes and your dreams, what you love, what you don't love. Write down anything you can about yourself, because one day you're going to want to remember that. Years down the road, when you realize you've forgotten who you are, you will read that and you'll be sad for a while. You'll feel sad for a while, but you'll realize that there was no other way. This is what you had to do, and you did it willingly, and you did it because you loved him, and you would not change that for anything in the world. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I lost myself for a long time, but I'm okay with that. I have the opportunity now to find who I am, and I am so grateful for that opportunity. But I am more grateful that I was able to care for him all those years, and I would not give that up for anything in the world.
Well, now that you got me all teary, that's so cool. And it's so useful for so many of us to look back on the hard turns that our life takes, because it's different for different people, right? Um, as we mentioned in the beginning of this, everybody goes through hard things. It's an unavoidable part of life. And I think if you can find the beauty in those and the growth, that will help you to not be defined exclusively by that hard thing, but rather by the triumph of overcoming that hard thing. So I think that's such good advice, not just for young RuthAnn, but also for anybody. Know what parts of you have carried through that tough thing, because likely those parts of you got stronger because of that tough thing. There's no other way for you to experience that growth than to have gone through the challenge. You don't ever get to experience triumph. Yeah, you don't ever get to experience triumph without having been challenged. There's no other way.
That's so true. And I know one of the things that when I was thinking about the topic this week, one of the things that I came across was post-traumatic growth. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is that? I'd never heard of it before. As I stated in the beginning, I do have a diagnosis of PTSD, so post-traumatic stress. And post-traumatic growth was something that I'd never heard of. So of course, my little researcher brain just went off looking at all these, reading all these articles, and I went into PubMed and everything. This is a real thing. And I know that that's what I have experienced through the trauma as I'm reliving it to do this podcast and various other projects that I'm working on. I know that I have grown through it, and that was just really fascinating to me to read that.
I love it. And it proves that point that there's a glimmer of hope in those challenges and hard times. And so if you get yourself bogged down into that one that one single piece of you, and the challenges that you face in that, you may rob yourself of the opportunity to experience that post-traumatic growth. That you have to, I think you have to carry little bits of yourself, whatever good parts of you went into that, that has to be the thread through the whole thing, right? Whatever positive character traits or um, things that you would consider positive qualities about yourself, those things for you was a tenacity that I still see in you. And you had said that was there prior to ever, even meeting Lance. You're just tough. And so carrying that through, that served you very well through such a traumatic experience and brought you through to the overcoming of being consumed by that, right? It didn't change the outcome of Lance's life ending, but it did change the outcome of your life ending, right? Prematurely.
Yes, because, and I've said this before, I didn't know if I would survive. And at, at the beginning, right after he died, I didn't really care. And as time went on, I started to care, and I'm really thankful that I'm here.
Well, that's that tough part of you. You're not gonna let yourself get kicked down by anything.
Yeah, we have talked about that a little bit too, that you might knock me down for a little bit, but when I get up, I'm really pissed off. I'm fighting harder than I was before. So watch out, world.
Well, clearly that has served you well and continues to this day.
Well, I thank you so much for joining me for another great conversation about not letting your circumstances define who you are.
Thanks for having me. We'll see you next time.